Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everybody. We're diving headfirst into some of history's most feared books. You know, those books shrouded in mystery, myth, and even, legend.
Yeah, the kind of books that some say are too dangerous to even open.
Exactly. The whispers of forbidden knowledge. Those complex explorations of things. Unseen.
They definitely capture the imagination, these books.
They do. This time we're looking at episode 92.
Episode 92.
C.W. Leadbeater's Man, Visible and Invisible. C.W. Leadbeater's vision of the aura, soul, and subtle bodies.
A title that certainly grabs your attention.
It does. Leadbeater, he wants us to think about how what we see and hear, what we sense around us, might only be a fraction, a small part of what makes a human being.
Right, like there's a hidden structure, multiple layers to our existence.
You brought this book to us, and we are so ready to explore Leadbeater's. Well, let's call them his clairvoyant insights into what makes us visible and invisible, like a map to the unseen parts of ourselves. We'll be diving into Leadbeater's idea that human beings aren't just physical. We're complex beings with multiple vehicles extending beyond what we can see or touch.
Like a set of nested bodies, each tuned to a different level of reality.
Exactly. And we'll discuss auras, the soul, those subtle bodies, the etheric, astral, mental, all from what Leadbeater presents as clairvoyant observation.
That's right. And our goal in this deep dive is to really understand Leadbeater's core ideas about what it means to be human, the nature of humanity and how we evolve, and hopefully, present these sometimes unusual ideas clearly in a way that makes you think, maybe even giving you a fresh way to look at yourself and the world. So a fundamental question we have to address is, how can we even know about these invisible aspects of ourselves, according to Leadbeater, that is?
He starts there. Leadbeater contrasts his perspective with what he sees as the limitations of purely materialistic or dogmatic views of human evolution. He's saying, look, understanding who we are shouldn't just be about blind faith or theories detached from any kind of investigation.
Yeah, it's not enough to just believe or speculate. We have to look deeper.
Right. And for Leadbeater, this is where Theosophy comes in. Not as another strict set of beliefs, but as a system, a way of exploring that emphasizes direct inquiry and personal experience, along with studying ancient wisdom and philosophical thought. So it's not just thinking about these things, but actually perceiving them.
Exactly. Leadbeater argues that we all have the potential to develop what he calls inner faculties, with clairvoyance being the most important in this book. He's saying that this ability to see beyond our normal physical senses is real. It's a skill you can develop, a tool for understanding the complexities of how we are made and how we've evolved.
And he's talking about something substantial. He uses the term definite record.
That's right. He calls it the Akashic record. Imagine like a universal library, a record of every thought, feeling, and event that's ever happened.
Wow.
Leadbeater suggests that with heightened clairvoyant ability, you can tap into this cosmic memory. He believes it's imprinted on a very subtle form of matter. So when we talk about human origins, the development of consciousness, it's not just theory, it's something that can be directly observed.
That's pretty mind-blowing. A cosmic history book accessed through inner sight. But Leadbeater knows that a lot of people are skeptical about clairvoyance. How does he address that?
Head on. He compares people who deny clairvoyance without experiencing it to, well, a blind person denying the existence of sight. If you've cultivated this faculty, trained yourself to see it, it seems illogical to him that someone would completely reject its possibility. In the context of man visible and invisible, Leadbeater doesn't feel the need to prove clairvoyance. He treats it as a given, a starting point, based on his own experiences and the experiences of others he finds credible.
Got it. So for our deep dive into this book, we're going with that understanding that clairvoyance, as Leadbeater explains it, is how he's able to see and explain these subtle aspects of being human. So, assuming we can see these things, what kind of reality does he lay out? He talks about planes of nature, right?
Yeah, that's fundamental to Leadbeater's framework. He proposes that reality isn't just this physical world we know. There are layers, interconnected layers, each with its own type of matter and level of consciousness. He calls them planes, and they represent different densities of matter. Like we understand solid, liquid, gas in the physical world, right? Well, Leadbeater adds the etheric state is a finer, more pervasive kind of physical matter.
And this isn't just an abstract idea. He links this to occult chemistry.
Right. Occult chemistry, as presented by Leadbeater and others, suggests that the chemical elements we know, they aren't the most basic building blocks of the universe. They're more like complex arrangements of simpler units. And with clairvoyant observation, these units can be broken down further into matter from different realms of nature, each with its own spectrum of states, similar to the solid, liquid, gas, and etheric states in the physical plane. So it's a hierarchy of matter, becoming more and more refined as you go beyond the purely physical.
Like peeling back layers to reveal something more fundamental. And then there are the astral and mental worlds, even more refined, right?
Exactly. The ultimate units of one plane subdivide into the fundamental units of the next more subtle plane. So you have the astral world made of astral matter, then the mental world with mental matter, and possibly planes beyond what we can even comprehend right now. And Leadbeater emphasizes that this subdivision seems to go on, although it gets harder and harder to observe as it gets more subtle.
So we're talking about planes. Might make you think they're stacked up, one on top of the other, like floors in a building. Is that how Leadbeater sees it?
That's an important point. While diagrams, even in his book, might show them that way to help us visualize, Leadbeater's very clear that these planes aren't separate places. They interpenetrate each other, occupying the same space. Think about a solid object. The atoms that make it up are mostly empty space. That space, Leadbeater says, is filled with what he calls the matter of the astral sea. In the same way, mental matter permeates astral matter, and so on. We're immersed in all these planes at the same time.
So accessing these planes isn't about physically going somewhere else, but more about tuning into them with our internal senses.
Yeah, exactly. Perceiving these planes requires a shift in our awareness, an awakening of those inner faculties we talked about, especially clairvoyance. It's about how we receive and interpret vibrations. It's not a physical journey to another dimension.
Okay, so we've got this model of interconnected planes, each with its own kind of matter. Where do we fit into all of this? Leadbeater introduces the idea of man's vehicles, right?
He does. Leadbeater proposes that humans have specific bodies or vehicles made of the matter that corresponds to each of these planes. So, interwoven with our physical body, there's an etheric body made of etheric matter. And as clairvoyant ability develops, you can perceive an astral body made of astral matter, a mental body made of mental matter, and so on, going to even subtler levels.
So it's like we're not just a single physical being, but more like a composite, a collection of bodies operating on different levels.
That's the idea. Leadbeater says the human soul doesn't have just one body, but many, allowing us to interact with and express ourselves on all these different levels. Each of these vehicles is composed of the type of matter that's most prevalent on its corresponding plane, so it can receive and process information from those worlds.
So we're not talking about things we develop later in life or through spiritual practice. We have these bodies from the start.
According to Leadbeater, yes, we have these vehicles from the very beginning of our individual existence. But we're not usually conscious of them or know how to use them. He gives an example. When we think a thought, it creates a vibration in our mental matter that a clairvoyant could see. But for that thought to become an action, it has to be transmitted down through these vehicles, from the mental body to the astral body, then to the etheric body, and finally impacting the physical brain.
It's like this cascade of energy, information flowing down through these different levels of ourselves. And he suggests that sensory perception works the other way around.
That's right. When our physical senses pick up information, it goes up through these levels of matter before it reaches the ego, or the soul. So our experience of the world involves this constant exchange, a translation of information between these different parts of ourselves.
And these astral and mental bodies aren't just passive receivers. They can pick up impressions directly from their respective planes.
Absolutely. Just like our physical body is made to perceive the physical world, the astral body can pick up impressions and let us experience the astral world when our consciousness is focused there. Same with the mental body and the mental world. Leadbeater explains that consciously focusing in these other bodies is a skill. You can learn to do it just like we learn to focus our attention using our physical brain.
Again, not some miraculous power, but a system of perception you can learn about and understand through the development of clairvoyance.
Right. To help explain the limitations of our normal senses, Leadbeater uses this analogy. Imagine beings who can only perceive solids or only liquids. Their understanding of the world would be so much more limited than ours. He's saying that clairvoyance is just expanding that range of perception, allowing us to see a wider range of vibrations.
Okay, so we've got these penetrating planes, each with its own type of matter, and our corresponding vehicles. Leadbeater mentions that these bodies have colors, and that sounds like we're starting to get into the concept of auras.
Yeah, that's right. He introduces the idea that these vehicles, all these parts of the human being, have different colors. And these colors aren't random. They directly relate to our thoughts, emotions, and how far we've developed spiritually. Leadbeater says he'll go into more detail about those colors later in the book, which we'll definitely talk about more.
So we have the planes, our vehicles, and the idea that these vehicles give off colored emanations. Now let's get into the question of where we come from, at least according to Leadbeater. He talks about the Trinity and earlier outpourings, which sounds like his explanation for the origin of the human soul.
Yeah, he's getting into theological ideas here, and he knows it. Based on what he perceives as records of the past, probably accessed through the Akashic record, he describes humanity as the result of this grand, intricate evolutionary scheme, 3 fundamental streams of divine life converging. He draws a parallel to the idea of a threefold deity, suggesting that the human soul also has this threefold nature.
And this isn't about some abstract, unknowable God, but rather the intelligence, the energy that guides our solar system, the logos.
Exactly. He clarifies that he's not talking about the ultimate infinite absolute, but the solar logos, the deity that's specific to our solar system, the one in whom we live and move and have our being, as the saying goes. Leadbeater believes you can see how this logos works, its purpose, when you study those higher planes of existence. And this solar logos, he says, manifests as a trinity, 3 aspects that are distinct, but also one.
He includes a diagram, plate 2, showing 3 circles on the highest plane representing these aspects. Can you walk us through what these stand for?
Sure. The first aspect, he says, mainly operates on that highest plane. Then the second aspect descends to the 6th plane, taking on a garment of the matter found there. And the third aspect goes down to the upper 5th plane, clothing itself in the matter of that realm. These 3 manifestations are distinct because of the level they work on and the matter they use, but they're still connected as aspects of the same divine unity, the solar logos.
Sounds like a more esoteric interpretation of the Christian Trinity.
He does address that directly, even referencing the debates between Eastern and Western Christianity about the Holy Ghost and its origin. Leadbeater suggests that his model could reconcile those viewpoints if we understand them on a deeper level.
That's a big claim. So how does this concept of the Trinity connect to the actual formation of human souls individually in his framework?
Leadbeater explains that each of these 3 aspects of the logos plays a specific role in preparing and developing the soul. He uses another diagram, plate 3, to illustrate this process. The third aspect, represented by a circle with a Greek cross inside, is called the life giver, kind of like the Holy Ghost. This aspect pours its energy into what he calls virgin matter, the most basic state of matter on each plane. This wakes up the potential of these fundamental units, and that starts the creation of the lower subplanes within each plane.
So the initial spark of life and the structure of those planes are all thanks to the third aspect. What about the role of the second aspect, often called the sun?
The second person, shown as a divided circle in the diagram, takes form from matter that's already been infused with the life force from the third person. Leadbeater points out that this is similar to the Christian idea of Jesus being incarnate of the Holy Ghost and the Virgin Mary, with Virgin Mary here representing primordial matter. This monadic essence, as he calls it, then starts a long, gradual journey down through the different elemental kingdoms over vast periods of time.
He mentions these elemental kingdoms and then the concept of group souls. This sounds like we're talking about stages of evolution way before individual human souls come about.
Exactly. Plate 4 in his book shows this descent and the beginning of the upward evolutionary path. The monadic essence, going down, vitalizes different grades of mental and astral matter. This creates what he calls the first, second, and third elemental kingdoms. Then it gets more involved with physical matter, gradually ensouling minerals, then plants, then animals. It's not a single monad doing this, but many, many streams evolving in parallel.
And the idea of the group soul comes up in the animal kingdom.
Yes. In the plant kingdom, you might have one group soul for an entire species. In the animal kingdom, there's more subdivision, but still, one group soul animates many individual animals. He uses an analogy. Imagine a big bucket of water representing the group soul and a glass of water taken from it representing the soul of one animal. The experiences, the qualities that animal gains during its life, like the unique characteristics of that glass of water when it dies, the water poured back into the bucket, they're dispersed throughout the group soul. It enriches the whole collective.
So it's a shared pool of experience for the species. How does an individual self-aware soul emerge from that?
Leadbeater says it's a gradual process, a separation within the group soul, a move towards individuality. like a cell starting to divide. Eventually, in certain animals, particularly those that develop strong bonds with humans, domesticated animals, a process he calls individualization can occur. A wave of consciousness carrying the experiences and qualities of that animal rises high enough to meet the hovering cloud of the third outpouring of divine life. That meeting creates a new individual soul, breaking free from the group soul.
Okay, so we follow this journey from divine outpourings down through the elemental kingdoms to group souls and finally to the point of individualization. What comes next in this evolution? Leadbeater then talks about the upward curve and human consciousness.
Yeah, the focus shifts to the monadic essence, going back up toward its source. The goal is to fully develop consciousness on all these planes and to consciously control those different vehicles, the different bodies. In the early stages, consciousness is mostly in the physical body, driven by instincts and basic sensations. Over long periods, this consciousness slowly expands to include the astral plane, with the development of emotions and desires. Then it goes to the mental plane, where reasoning and intellect emerge.
And Plate 4 visually represents this upward journey. We can see the increasing development of desire on the astral plane and intelligence on the mental plane as we move through minerals, plants, and animals.
Exactly. And when you look at the human stage on that plate, there are a few important differences. You see a full width of development in both the physical and astral planes, which means humans can have a wide range of physical experiences and desires. There's also full width in the lower mental plane, meaning we have a fully developed ability to reason at that level. But the key thing that marks the transition to human consciousness, according to Leadbeater, is a dark blue triangle on the higher mental plane. This represents the causal body, which he calls the vehicle of the permanent reincarnating ego, the individual soul.
So the development of this causal body is a huge step in the evolution of consciousness. And the consciousness at these higher mental levels unfold gradually over many lifetimes.
Yes. Leadbeater suggests that early humans were mostly conscious on the lower astral plane, heavily influenced by physical sensations and immediate wants. For an ordinary human, the evolutionary path involves slowly moving that center of consciousness, from sensations to reasoning and intellect, moving from the higher astral to the lower mental, and eventually developing higher principles and abstract thought. But to actively use all these different bodies, to be aware in them, takes effort. It means breaking through what he calls the shell of self-centered thought.
He mentions a few different ways this shell can be broken, which helps consciousness expand.
He talks about four main ways. One is natural evolution. Over countless lifetimes, we slowly evolve. Another is conscious effort. Through practices like meditation and self-discipline, we can break through. Sometimes accidents or the misuse of energies can tear that veil of perception, but it's not really a recommended path. And finally, a more advanced individual can help. They can act on this cloud shell from the outside and help someone break through. Leadbeater also mentions the possibility of consciously directing yourself on the astral plane while you're asleep, or in other altered states of consciousness for helpful work or learning.
Now let's discuss the third outpouring and formation of the individual. How does this relate to individualization?
This is the third major outpouring of divine life, and it comes from the first aspect of the Logos. It specifically creates the individual spirit of the man, which goeth upward, unlike the animal soul, which goes back to the group soul after death. Leadbeater says this third wave of divine energy hangs out on the Buddhic plane, which is a very high level of consciousness, waiting to meet the rising second outpouring, the monadic essence, which is evolving upward. You can see this in Plate 3.
He uses the analogy of a water spout between a cloud and the sea to illustrate this point of connection. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure, all the different group souls are constantly sending out waves of life into the lower planes, resulting in individual animals. When one of these waves, representing a particularly developed animal, rises high enough in its evolution, maybe because of increased consciousness or even strong devotion, it can connect with that third outpouring from the first aspect of the Logos. This forms a new individual center of consciousness, a soul that's now separate from the group's soul and not just part of that divine outpouring either. This marks the true individualization of the soul. The ensouling principle, the monadic essence, becomes the ensouled individual, and the causal body forms from the refined essence of that animal group soul, now a vehicle for this higher individual divine life.
All right, we've talked about the planes, the vehicles, how the soul originates and develops. Now, Leadbeater starts describing what these different bodies actually look like to someone with clairvoyant sight. He includes a bunch of illustrations. We'll start with what his bodies show us, plates 5, 6, and 7, showing what he calls primitive man.
Leadbeater emphasizes that the causal body, plate 5, the mental body, plate 6, and the astral body, plate 7, aren't spatially separated. They occupy the same space. But what a clairvoyant sees depends on the level of their perception. The astral body, he says, is like a mirror of feeling. It's always changing, reflecting emotions, but with a more stable underlying pattern that shows ingrained tendencies.
So what would a clairvoyant see in the primitive man's mind body, shown in plate 6?
Overall, it's dull, with colors that are not refined, showing undeveloped mental qualities. You see this dull, murky yellow representing a selfish and undeveloped intellect. There's muddy gray-blue, indicating fearful, self-serving devotion. Affection is a muddy crimson, tinged with self-interest too. Low pride shows up as dull orange. Anger is scarlet flashes. A dirty green represents deceit, treachery, and greed. And there's this overall muddiness representing selfishness.
Doesn't sound very pleasant. And the astral body of this primitive person in plate 7.
Maybe even less so, visually. It's mostly an unpleasant brownish red, showing strong sensuality and basic physical desires. You can see areas of deceit, selfishness, and greed. Anger is that dull scarlet again. And there's hardly anything that suggests higher emotions like affection, intellect, or any religious feeling. The outline of the astral body is irregular, colors mixed together, suggesting a lack of control over impulses and emotions. But Leadbeater reminds us that this is a stage everyone has gone through in their evolution.
Good point. It's a stage of development, not a judgment. Moving on, we've got the ordinary person in plates 8, 9, X, and X. What progress are we seeing in their subtle bodies?
In the causal body, you see more colors, and they're more vibrant, delicate. It shows the development of better qualities. There are signs of growing love, devotion that's less selfish, sympathy for others, a more developed intellect, and the start of spiritual aspirations. There might even be faint violet, showing the potential for higher devotion, and touches of green, meaning growing sympathy and compassion.
So the core of the person, the causal body, is starting to show those good qualities. What about the mental body? Plate 9.
You see more of the colors associated with intellect, yellow, affection, rose, and devotion, blue. And these colors are clearer, of a better quality than in the primitive man. Pride might still be there, but maybe on a higher level, related to achievements or good qualities instead of ego. Anger's still there, but often lower down in the mental cloud, suggesting more control. Selfish tendencies are still there, but maybe not as strong.
And the astral body of this ordinary person, shown in plate X.
It's similar to the mental body in terms of what it shows, but the colors are usually rougher, more intense. Emotions and desires on the astral plane are more direct, less refined. Sensuality, selfishness, deceit might still be there, but less extreme. It's interesting the green that meant cunning in the primitive man seems to be splitting, maybe evolving into adaptability, even resourcefulness. Leadbeater points out that this illustration shows the average state of the astral body. Strong emotions can cause big temporary changes in how it looks.
Which brings us to the next section. Sudden emotions, illustrated in plates 11 through 14th and 16th. How do these strong feelings change the aura?
Take plate 11, which shows the effect of a pure, strong emotion like deep affection, like a mother's love for her child. The astral body gets agitated, suffused with this clear rose-pink color, and often you see golden, star-like sparks coming out. The blue of devotion also gets stronger. This is Leadbeater's way of showing that loving thoughts and emotions actually affect the other person, like you're transferring something of yourself, creating a sympathetic connection.
That's a powerful visual. What about a more destructive feeling, like violent anger in plate 12?
That's a stark difference. Violent anger shows up as jagged, deep red flashes on a dark, almost black background. It looks destructive, chaotic. Leadbeater says this kind of anger can harm not just the person feeling it, but also other people's astral bodies, like throwing out sharp, energetic projectiles. He also warns that when you're this angry, you're more vulnerable to negative influences from the astral plane.
What about fear, shown in plate 14?
Fear gives off a completely different look. It's a livid, grayish mist throughout the astral body, often with horizontal, vibrating lines. The whole thing looks ghastly, weakened, lacking vibrancy.
And what about something more ego-driven, like selfish ambition, shown in plate 13?
Leadbeater says that selfish ambition usually causes a lot of muddy orange in the astral body, which basically hides or suppresses the more refined, higher colors of compassion, intellect, and spiritual aspiration.
And lastly, we have the irritable man in plate 60.
Here you see this broad band of scarlet, the color of anger, but also tons of little floating flecks of scarlet all over the astral body. Those represent the constant little annoyances and uncontrolled bursts of impatience that make someone irritable.
So we're seeing how emotions can have a real visual impact on our subtle bodies. Let's move on to more permanent conditions, where pleats 9X and XX illustrate the devotional and scientific types. What's different about their auras that reflects these tendencies?
The devotional type often has some faint violet, showing the potential for high spiritual ideals, but it's usually mixed with this strong but kind of muddy blue, suggesting that their religious feeling might be mixed with self-interest or emotional attachment. They usually don't have much yellow, the color of intellect, and while there might be decent amounts of rose, affection, and green adaptability, those lower emotions, sensuality, deceit, selfishness, they tend to be really strong. And the colors are kind of jumbled up, which suggests a lack of clear understanding.
So strong emotional faith, but maybe not balanced with clear thinking or pure motives. How does the aura of the scientific type compare?
The scientific type, as Leadbeater describes them, usually doesn't have much blue, the color of devotion. Sensuality might be less than in the devotional type, but there's a ton of that clear golden yellow of intellect. Affection and adaptability aren't as developed because of the strong intellectual focus. Interestingly, selfishness and even greed can still be present, and there's a noticeable capacity for jealousy, maybe because of competition or a sense of superiority. Overall, it's an unbalanced picture. The intellect is overdeveloped at the expense of emotional and spiritual qualities.
Two very different paths of development, each with its own energy signature. Now let's look at the developed man in plates 21, 22, and 1303. What does the aura look like when someone has achieved a greater degree of inner harmony and spiritual progress?
Leadbeater defines a developed man here as someone who's pure-minded, focused on higher truths, and living for an ideal, though not yet at the level of a full adept. Their causal body, plate 21, is described as being incredibly beautiful, iridescent, filled with those refined qualities of love, devotion, sympathy, intellect, and spiritual aspirations. You see these higher energies flowing outward, and at the top there's a crown of brilliant sparks representing their ongoing spiritual striving.
That's a big change from the earlier depictions of the causal body. How does this refinement show up in the mental body?
The mental body of the developed man is very refined. It closely resembles the causal body, but it's operating on a slightly different level. The lower emotions like pride, anger, and selfishness are gone. The colors are more expansive, clearer, and have a higher vibration. You see a pure violet, often with gold and star-like points within it. And the mental body is now a much more effective channel for those higher spiritual forces.
And what about the astral body?
It's almost a mirror image of the mental body, which shows how strongly the mind controls desires and emotions. There might still be brief moments of irritability or craving, but they don't dominate the energy field. Those higher emotions and aspirations are the dominant traits. Leadbeater also mentions that clear yellow of intellect is mostly around the head. He suggests this is the energy behind those halos you see in religious art. And he points out that the mental body of the developed person shows what the causal body will eventually achieve at a later stage of development.
That's a beautiful picture of how inner development is reflected in those subtle energies. Now, Leadbeater has a section on the health aura in plates TXE4 and XEV. This seems to be more about the physical well-being of the person.
That's right. Leadbeater introduces the etheric double, which is part of the physical body. It extends a little bit beyond the dense physical form. To a clairvoyant, it looks like this faint, luminous mist, violet-grayish in color. Its main jobs are to connect the astral body and the physical body and to distribute vital force throughout the physical body.
And this vital force is actually visible.
Well, the vital force itself is more like an energy, but Leadbeater describes it as having a pale rose color once it's absorbed into the etheric body, mostly through the spleen. Then it flows along the nerves. In healthy people, this vital force radiates out from the body. But when someone's weak or depleted, they unconsciously absorb this energy from those around them.
He also describes a purely physical aspect to the health aura, which is separate from the etheric double that carries the vital force.
Yes. It's like a faint grayish mist made of tiny physical particles, often described as having a crystal-like structure radiating out from the body. In a healthy person, this aura usually looks bluish-white and striated, with nice, even lines of energy radiating out. If there's disease, these lines get messy, droopy, and disorganized. The constant flow of vital force keeps this physical health aura strong. It acts as a defense against germs. When someone's vitality is weak, this defense weakens. Interestingly, Leadbeater says that you can actually use your willpower to make this health aura stronger, like a protective shell.
Finally, we come to the causal body of the adept in Plate 26. This represents the most advanced stage of human development that Leadbeater shows, right?
Right. Leadbeater says you can't really fully depict the causal body of a true adept using the colors and forms we know because it's beyond our normal experience. He describes it as being huge, radiating with this sun-like splendor. It's incredibly beautiful and bright. The colors are arranged in concentric shells with light streaming out in every direction. The order and intensity of the colors depends on the specific type of adept. He even says those traditional pictures of Buddha with a halo, while often simplified, might come from a vague perception of this highly evolved energy field.
Plate 66 specifically shows the causal body of an arhat, which he says is a very advanced student, almost at the level of an adept.
Right. Even showing this level of development is a challenge. The colors are supposed to be even more delicate, ethereal than in the developed man, but also more full, brilliant, and luminous. The illustration tries to show the depth and arrangement of these colors, as well as how huge the causal body is compared to the physical form. The causal body of the Arhat shows incredible development of all those higher qualities: intellect, love, devotion, sympathy, spirituality, and it acts as an almost perfect channel for the life and power of the Logos. It radiates pure white light in all the colors of the rainbow, and it has a strengthening effect on everyone around it. Leadbeater adds that the mind and astral bodies of an adept like this are shimmering, iridescent reflections of that highly evolved causal body.
So basically, those higher aspects of our being, the causal body and beyond for those further along the path, represent the real person. Our physical form is just one temporary expression of this deeper, more radiant self. As we develop spiritual sight and understanding, we can perceive this true nature more clearly.
Exactly. Our normal physical perception is just a tiny glimpse of how complex and luminous we truly are.
This has definitely been a deep dive into the world that Leadbeater presents in man, visible and invisible. To recap, he gives us this model where humans are multifaceted beings existing on multiple planes of reality, each with its own type of matter. We have these subtle bodies and auras that show our inner emotional and mental states, as well as our evolutionary progress, all through the lens of clairvoyance.
Right. And by engaging with this model, you get a new way of seeing things, a different understanding of your own inner life and the energies that are always shaping your experiences. It encourages you to see yourself as something much greater than just your physical body.
Absolutely. So here's something to think about. How does Leadbeater's vision challenge your own ideas about what it means to see and to be? What might you be missing in yourself and the world because your senses are tuned to such a limited part of reality?
That's a great question to ponder. If you're interested in exploring this further, we encourage you to check out C.W. Leadbeater's Man, Visible and Invisible, or look into other ideas within Theosophy. There's so much more to discover beyond what we normally see.
Thanks for sharing your curiosity in this thought-provoking book with us. It's always a journey taking these deep dives. Until next time.